8 to start out with. Well, it's real hard. By the way, you notice that I'm polishing by, the grip here and pushing there. After you polish I polish for an hour or so, I find that I could use the old method I used with my 12-inch many years ago. You put your hands on the top like this, and the friction, see, it's a little slippery now, but this smooth glass and the friction it makes with the palm of your hands is enough that it'll pull the mirror back and forth. I don't know whether that's a better way to do it or not, but it seems more natural to me to do it like this. See, just pushing it back and forth like that. Now my hands are slipping, but after half an hour to an hour of polishing, it won't do that. It'll tend to grip all of a sudden. I don't know whether the lap gets broken in or what, but right now I have to do it the way the guy recommended, which is this way. I'm going to start trying to get slightly longer strokes now. It's got a very interesting feel to it. I'm not having any music in the background when I polish. It's too distracting. This is a job where you have to keep your mind on the job, to a certain extent at least. Now I'm doing 8 double strokes. As I get going later and it becomes a little easier to move, I usually do 10 in the brute force work. Just knock it out, trying to get the pits out. It's probably better to do 8 when I'm doing finesse work, like trying to get an accurate sphere or paraboloid or whatever. Not quite so many strokes in each position. I'm not pushing down too hard either. I'm just sort of letting the weight of the mirror do the job right now, plus my hands and whatever pressure I need just to keep the thing moving. When I'm pushing down the other, like this way that I showed you, like this, that tends to put a little bit more pressure on the mirror downward, and it probably polishes a little bit more quickly that way. Also, I try and center the mirror, like as you can see, so that all the squares are covered before I rotate it. I don't know whether it's necessary or not, but there's a reason for that, and that is so that the mirror's edge will not be digging into the squares during the time that I rotate it. So, notice I'm doing 10 double strokes now with each W pattern. I'm using longer strokes for this one. This is about as long as I usually do during the normal polishing. Now I'll probably do some slightly shorter ones. The longer strokes tend to polish the edge of the mirror because the edge better than they would the shorter strokes do, because especially with a sub-sized tool like this, because you have to have the edge actually contacting the pitch in order to get it polished. And the longer strokes are actually better. The edge of this thing, within a quarter of an inch of the edge, is not polishing nearly as fast as the center. There's still sort of a haze within a quarter of an inch of the edge, which is not too serious because the rest of the mirror looks almost perfect as far as pits go. But I'm just doing the last hour or two to try and get the edge a little better. But it's not too serious because it'll probably be a turned down edge I'll have to mask off anyway. The guy that did the articles on making large mirrors says don't even think about having the outside of your edge perfect. You can count on losing the outer edge of your mirror about a quarter of an inch wide to a turned down edge. It almost always happens. So sometimes the mirror, the polishing tends to control me more than I tend to control it. I'm going to try and polish this way now. Look, it's starting to work, see? Today it seems to be functioning very well. So you can push down a little bit on it when you're working it. That's good, that's very nice. I'll just rotate this way and rotate this a little bit farther, maybe about a 30-degree amount. You can move your hands in and out. Like, you got some of the polishing you can do with your hands here, and then you can move them in and out at different radial positions, like that while you're working. I'll start out with them a little wide today. It's a little bit easier to estimate the stroke length when you have your hands near the center, because the thumbs naturally point toward the center of the mirror, and you can estimate how long the stroke is by comparing it with the pitch squares. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 squares across the diameter. So that means if you go back and forth by about 3 squares, you're using a 1/3 stroke as related to the diameter of the tool. So it makes it a little bit easier to estimate just what stroke lengths you're using. This is working really well today. The tools are very cantankerous sometimes. I like to have my hands a little bit so that the palms are almost at the center sometimes, because then I can push down with the heels of my hand and it doesn't tire my fingers out trying to push down. Sometimes you have to push down kind of heavy to get enough of a grip to make it move. This looks very easy, and actually right now it's not that hard, but sometimes the physical work is really quite demanding. The actual effort it takes to do it is really pretty rough. Right now I'm having a good time. It's not nearly as bad as it sometimes is. It's nice to be able to cold press with the sheet of a nice smooth sheet of aluminum foil, because when you do that, you can take the mirror. You don't have to use polishing agent or soap or anything to cold press. I found that the original squares, with cold pressing for an hour, just with the weight of the mirror alone, was enough to start polishing. Even though all the squares were not in contact with the mirror, it didn't seem to matter, because within a few hours they all were. And then after they're trimmed once or twice, they're certainly in pretty good contact right now, which will tend to remove any slight irregularities that were there at the beginning of polishing. I haven't even tested the mirror for optical accuracy yet, because Texero recommends in his book, How to Make a Telescope, that you don't test your mirror till nearly at least almost the end of polishing, because what happens is during the polishing operation to remove the pits, if you use your strokes right, like I'm hopefully doing now, most of the irregularities in the mirror will be either reduced or eliminated automatically just by the 1/3 polishing action. It tends to eliminate any defects, so it's very good that way. You end up with an almost perfectly spherical mirror if you polish correctly. Even a large one like this should not have any defects more than about half a wave in height. You notice I'm not polishing very fast. They recommend about 1 double stroke per second, which is about what I use usually. I can move my hands a little bit closer to the center now. It's a little harder to get leverage that way though, but the temperature affects the warmth of your hand goes through evenly through the mirror if you have it move your hands around. You're not just concentrating all the heat from your hands on either the edge or the center. But it tends to pivot a bit more around irregular squares in the tool, or slightly drier squares or whatever. If you have your hands near the center, you can feel it pivot a bit more usually, but it's not too bad today. Barnside, as I say, is not as nice and smooth to work with as rouge is, as red jeweler's rouge. I'm not concentrating too much on the number of strokes per position, because I'm thinking more about what I'm saying for the camera, but usually I usually have consistently 10 or 8 or something like that. But it doesn't hurt to vary the number of strokes anyway. It's probably a good idea to do that. I'll use a little bit shorter stroke for a while, just to make sure I don't get a deep hyperboloid for a surface or something like that. This really feels very good today. It's really polishing very nicely. 1.5 hours ago, in terms of polishing time, I trimmed the squares. So they're just starting to bulge out just slightly now. They won't bulge out as fast either, because they're a lot thinner after having been trimmed twice. I just, when I glued the squares on, I didn't lay out any pattern. All I did was make a very careful estimate, like with a ruler of the center of the mirror, made a dot like an X with a pencil, and make sure that that's just inside, about a quarter of an inch inside the corner of one of the squares, which they recommend you do so you don't have any radial asymmetric patterns of pitch squares. And that way you don't get radial zones forming in the mirror as easily. You want to have everything as random as possible. Now when I didn't draw pencil lines all over the mirror in a big grid like they recommend when I put the squares on, because I found with other mirrors that you can estimate where you're putting the squares in a pattern just by using your eyes. You can estimate what an even pattern is when you're making it. It's really pretty easy. There's not much to it. As you can see, the pattern looks pretty even there. There's about a ½ inch gap between the squares right now, which is about what I wanted. Now I'll use a little bit longer strokes for a few minutes. Sometimes the mirror grabs and binds a little bit and almost controls where the stroke is going to go on its own and how long the stroke is going to be. And it might be because of differential drawing in the squares or just because it's stubborn, but this is not as easy a job as the fine grinding. Like, it's got all kinds of idiosyncrasies. That's not just my idea. I've read in books that polishing tools seem to have a mind of their own. You know, you're sort of like a cat. You can't really control that much what a cat does. It has a mind of its own. The same thing with a polishing tool. It seems to largely have a mind of its own. A little bit longer strokes. Trying to keep the law of averages only one-third strokes on the average. I'm probably tending to average a little bit less than a third of a stroke, but I like to have a few long ones here and there just to make sure that the edge gets polished okay, the edge of the mirror. Most books recommend that you put the tool on top to polish at least some of the time, to make sure that you get a more uniform polish in a hurry from the center to the edge of the mirror, because if you have the tool on top, it tends to polish the edge faster than if the mirror is on top. But I prefer to polish with a big thin mirror like this. Personally, I would rather polish the entire thing and do as much of the figuring as possible with the mirror on top like I have now, partly because I'm used to it that way, and partly because it avoids astigmatism in the mirror, which can be a really big problem with a large thin mirror like this. It can do a lot more damage to the aesthetic beauty of the image in a star to have astigmatism in your optical system, even a small amount of it, than say a bad zone, that's concentric zone or some spherical aberration. They just make the image look a little bit fuzzy, but astigmatism makes the star images look distorted and ugly at high power or even medium power. So personally, I'd rather avoid astigmatism as much as possible and do most of the polishing and figuring if I can with the mirror on top. It's maybe a little bit more longer to polish, but that's all right. That's better than trying to remove astigmatism from the mirror if it's polished in there. I have to go back and polish a whole bunch of strokes with the mirror on top anyway, so I might as well start out doing that. This is such a high-speed polishing agent, barnsite, that you really don't have to worry that much about the time it takes to polish. As you can see, things are just zipping right along now. This is going really well. Hope I'm not boring you with all this, but in a sense, polishing a large mirror is sort of a tedious, boring operation anyway. I'll show you you might notice that I have the rear foot way back. You probably won't be able to see that in the video, the way the camera is aimed, and I can't really change the aim of the camera right now, but with the grinding, you don't have to have your foot back that far because you're not using a lot of horizontal force to move it. But with the polishing, you tend to have a lot of horizontal force you have to use sometimes. So I sort of stand with my right foot right up against the barrel and my rear foot my right foot about 2 feet back. And that way I can lean over like that and get some good leverage when I'm moving the mirror back and forth. It's just sort of a